That is reflected in the Arabic language, in the ocean being called al-Bahr al-Muhit, which means the circling or surrounding ocean. And of course today we don't conceive of the oceans that way anymore, but the word remained the same in Arabic. So al-Muhit al-Hadi is the Pacific Ocean, al-Muhit al-Atlasi is the Atlantic Ocean, and so on.
So this water doesn't really circle the earth?
No, not in the way it was conceived of, because the earth was conceived of as being like a disk, and the water was at the extreme of it all around. And so early cosmologies thought differently than we now think. And anyhow, today, cosmology certainly would emphasize the scarcity and rareness of water in the universe. And there aren't any planets that are watery like the Earth is. However, one of the moons of Jupiter is believed to contain an ocean underneath its surface. That is, its surface is frozen ice, water ice, and underneath that it's believed to contain an ocean of water, actually. That is the moon of Jupiter named Europa. Europa, that is the one that's thought to have water like the Earth. And then there's some water found on the other planets, like there's a little bit of water at the polar caps of Mars. In fact, the polar caps of Mars, in their dense part, which is their small part, their minimal part, because they expand and contract with the seasons on Mars. The part that expands and contracts is the carbon dioxide freezing and then evaporating. Whereas the water ice on Mars is ice all the time, and there's very little of it. The planet Mars, compared to the Earth, has exceedingly little water. In other places, there'd be no water at all. It's not known that there's any water at all on Mercury or the Moon. And on the Moon, they talk excitedly about there being a single deposit of water here or there in some crater or something. Well, hardly. There's really no water on the Moon. And that, in fact, even constitutes a problem for any future possible colonization of the Moon, the complete, utter lack of water. And so they were hopeful that if they had some small pool of water, they could use that even, although that would be a limited resource and wouldn't be renewable and would be used up. So that isn't even a practical idea. And the scarcity of water then, in general, as well as scarcity of water on the Earth, suggests that for all its necessity and essentialness, it is not abundant and needs to be conserved.
Thank you. There are some verses in the Quran and possibly some other hadith too that kind of speak about water. One example is the ayah in Surah Al-Anbiya, chapter 21, verse 30, and وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ. That's just part of the ayah. And there's another one in Surah Hud, where there is an indication that God's own throne is actually established on the water. فَكَانَ عَرْشُهُ عَلَى الْمَاءِ. And other verses like that. How would you explain, or what's the significance of this ayah in relation to how Muslims understand water and what kind of significance or importance they attach to it?
Well, Hud, verse 7, of course, traditionally has been explained as with the ancient cosmology, where the sky is a fixed firmament, crystalline barrier, so that the air which we breathe has beyond that barrier, the dome of the sky, water, which would appear from the blue color of the sky. And now we know this is not the case. It's not water. It's empty space. But it was conceived classically, and the classical commentators would say that there was water. And so the throne of God, which would be precisely above Mecca, and constantly there, would be above the waters of creation that were outside of the dome of the sky. But now, reinterpreting that in the light of modern science, we would say that with the commentator Muhammad Asad, who said that the water is the basis of everything. So God's throne is on the water because water is the basis of all of creation. And God's throne itself must be, of course, a created thing, which is symbolic of exalting God above all else. So that the basis of creation and basis of the living existence of all living things has to be water, as far as we know. And that's another thing which comes out is the uniqueness of life on the earth. That is, there is no life that is known except what is on the earth, and the earth is the watery planet, and life here depends generally on water. There may be some forms of life which either can exist without water or do not consist of water, but none of the higher creatures would that be true of. Now, the humble mouse can exist without drinking. Mice do not need to drink. But their bodies are, like ours, mostly composed of water nonetheless, and they get water from the things that they eat. And so even though they don't drink and do not need a source of water to drink, but still they need water to survive. And we created everything, every living thing from water. In Surah Al-Anbiya, of course, obviously that then is connected with what we just said about his throne was upon the water. And there is also Surah Muhammad